Cheers, guys. Epix 911, welcome to the Elitist Geek and a VR hardware episode where we take a look at and talk about my first 48 hours with the bad boy right here, Sony PlayStation VR. I've put this through hours and hours of gaming the last 2 days, and yeah, can't wait to start talking about it. So let's jump right into VR, guys. The Sony PlayStation VR, the very first thing that you notice when you take this thing out of the box is, damn, this kind of looks like a futuristic sci-fi toy. And remember that label, because we're going to get back to it in a second. In terms of how it feels, the fit of the three VR HMDs is hands down the most comfortable. This has the best fit. There's a little button here that you press in, and that slides it out, right? And it's meant to just go over the crown of your head. So watch. Let go. Done. That's it. That's all there is to putting a Sony HMD on your head to start playing. Let's talk about this for just a couple of minutes here, okay? The thing that makes this so comfortable compared to the other two units, and when I talked about this in theory, that was one thing. Getting to feel it, a whole different ball game. And what I'm talking about is the way this rests on the crown of your head. So you can see here, it's literally this circular band that bears the brunt of the weight, which is pretty damn minor to begin with, right? The beauty of that is there's no real muscles or nerves in that area or on that area of your scalp. So you're not feeling any discomfort, pain, pressure at all. And it has the effect of the visor portion of the HMD of just resting on your forehead. Unlike the Rift and Vive where it's pressing into your forehead, right? And that's just the design that Sony chose to go with. And I think it's brilliant. I think they are the clear number one in terms of comfort. The second thing you notice as soon as it's on your head like this is it is beautifully dark. There is no light leakage, okay? Maybe if you've got some, non-standard mouth design or nose, or sure. For me personally, though, I'm looking down right now the bridge of my nose like I would on the Rift or Vive. With both of those units, I could see a plate of food pretty clearly, my socks, my gut, the chair I'm sitting on, all of that kind of stuff. With this, absolutely not. It is dark. Corner to corner to corner to corner, darkness. And it's a beautiful thing. And you guys know it's pretty damn bright in here. I've got, the ceiling lights. I've got the YouTube video, fancy umbrella lights. There's a hell of a lot of light. And as far as I'm concerned, I'm perfectly blindfolded. I don't see a thing. Now, there's a negative to this design and to that awesome comfort. And it's just that you are going to treat this, at least that's been my thing, as very brittle, okay? Because of how it looks. Remember when I used the word toy? It doesn't feel any less of a toy, albeit an expensive one when it's in your hands, right? Because it's so light and you know what it's capable of, like you hear that, right? That's a hollow echo tap. There's not a lot going on there. There's a lot of air, obviously, because of the design. It just feels much more fragile than it actually is. Like, I've been babying this thing. I probably don't need to be that ridiculous with it, but it's how the unit makes you feel, right? Perfect example. We just talked about the area that you rest on the crown of your head, right? And then the visor portion. This little band here, right there, that little plastic piece going in and on the back is all that connects the two. That's it, just that tiny little bridge there. It's stuff like that that just makes you think it's a lot more fragile than it is. Now, I've got that sectional on this side of the man cave here. It's about 18 inches off of the hardwood floor. Yesterday, in typical sloppy Epix maneuver, I tangled the cord and the HMD went flying off the sectional to the hardwood. I swear, guys, my heart pretty much stopped, and I thought for sure, based on babying this thing, that was it. Lights out. I just went and screwed up, and there's my money down the drain. Thankfully, not even a scratch on it. So it's obviously not as brittle as you think it is, by the way you're going to baby this thing, right? So it's durable. It can put up with that. That's not an issue. Let's talk about visuals and what you see when it's actually on and doing VR stuff. The very first thing that I noticed was the field of view. And I'm going to say up front, it didn't bother me. Field of view, maybe it's a psychological thing, but when I know the field of view is a number, like 100 for this versus 110 for the other two, all of that stuff has already happened in my brain. I've done the calculation. Oh, okay, I'm going to get 10% less field of view on this than the other ones. I wonder if it's noticeable. It is. You definitely notice, and it feels more than just 10%, like the 10% it is on paper. It felt like 15 to 20% narrower field of view versus the Rift and the Vive. So if you are someone who is at all bothered by the field of view, and I know there's some of you out there that, because I've read the comments, right, that feel you don't like the circular look, the field of view on the Rift or the Vive. It feels like you're looking through a cardboard tube. This is not the device for you because it's much more pronounced on this one, right? Luckily, again, it doesn't bother me. I had no issue with it. Just a heads up for those of you that field of view is a thing. It's going to be more of a thing on this, okay? The other thing people want to know is the screen door effect. And I'm happy to say, even though there's lower resolution on this, the screen door effect, to me anyways, was no more pronounced on this than the Rift or the Vive. And those have always kind of been roughly on par for me, right? Maybe a little bit of a difference with it being a little bit more noticeable on one than the other, but essentially on par. Throw this into the mix as being pretty much with those guys, same level. You can obviously see it, but if you're up against dark backgrounds, dark colors, which a lot of the games are, you're not going to notice it. It's bright colors, full spectrums of a solid lighter color is where you notice the screen door effect, and it is very squarish on the Sony PlayStation VR. Not circular, a little bit more circular, like spherical it looks on the Vive. This one is strictly a grid. So again, if that's something that bothers you, know that at least to me, it was about on par. So you're not going to necessarily be bothered more or less by it. It's about the same, okay? Visual quality. Now this one we got to talk about just for a little bit because there's some caveats. It's not an apples to apples comparison with the launch of the Rift or the Vive. And here's what I mean by that. The Rift and the Vive launch was, or heavily consisted of, independent game titles, right? The majority of the games that we played at launch were indie games. The majority of those indie games in no way taxed or came near to taxing the capability of either the resolution or the frame rate of either the Rift or the Vive. I think most of you will agree with that, right? It wasn't until we started seeing games using the Unreal Engine, stuff like raw data, for example, where you were starting to feel like we're approaching the upper end. I think that's a fair statement to make, right? What Sony benefits from, and I guess it's a curse and a benefit, but we'll flesh that out, is that the majority of their titles are non-indie. It's the other way around. And those games, that are part of the launch are closer to the top end of what Sony VR is capable of. So I think that has the effect of, more or less leveling the playing field. So you're not, put it this way, we know on paper Sony has the poorest GPU, the poorest resolution. That doesn't come across with the launch titles. It feels every bit as if it's hanging in there with the Rift and the Vive, with most of those titles, because, graphically, they're closer to that top end than any of the titles that we played on the Vive or Rift's launch. That's the sense I got. There are a few games that look, really good. Rigs is a game that I really like. I love the vibrant colors of there. Consequently, that's one where I noticed the screen door effect because of those brighter colors. But the graphical complexity, it looked almost every bit as good as Damaged Core does on the Rift. Very similar in terms of their color palettes and some of the kind of the visual design. But I would say they're on par. One doesn't stand out way above the other, right? So with the slew of games that you're getting for the Sony PlayStation VR launch, I think they've done a really good job playing to the strengths, not the weaknesses of that resolution, unlike we saw with the Rift and the Vive, where the games didn't come close to the maximum potential, and really to this day still haven't. We have yet to see a steady stream of VR titles pushing that envelope. And again, I'm purely talking graphics here, not fun. I'm not saying that doesn't mean it's a good game or a fun game. I'm just talking graphically, and that's it, right? That's the portion that we're talking about right now. So we covered field of view, screen door effect, and visual clarity and graphical prowess, right? That's kind of a bit of a negative with the Sony PlayStation here. In that, on the Rift and the Vive, you've got easier ways to manipulate the interpupillary distance, or the IPD, right? The Vive, you've got the knob. The Rift, you've got the slider. On this one, other than you can make some changes here, by pushing that out. So if you've got glasses, you do have some leeway. What you're not able to do is the IPD as easily. So that's kind of a blessing and a curse at the same time. And what I mean by that is you can have a very blurry image and just moving, like a small adjustment of your visor, up a little bit, down a little bit, whatever it may be, suddenly it's sharp. And vice versa. You could go from sharp to a little blurry very quickly. So some of that may be that I didn't have the best, tightest, fit that I needed, right? That was good to start, and then it wouldn't alter. That could be, and I'll have to do some more testing. But I did notice that I could switch between blurry and clear pretty quickly. So just keep that in mind. If you're getting a blurry picture, it could be just a matter of moving it up, down, left, right, out a little bit to suddenly make it very clear. Because I noticed people said, yeah, it's blurry, it's blurry. I did have that, but I was able to fix it very quickly, that blurriness. So let's just throw that back there for a second. And yeah, so I talked about light leakage as well. What about the tracking? Because I know this comes up time and time again, okay? In terms of tracking, for me, I had no issues. Now, this is not a tracking test video. I have not even begun to do the battery of tests that I'm going to do when I test that bad boy for tracking. I will basically break it and submit it to my will. This was not tracking testing. This was just me playing and observing. All the titles that I played basically kept me pretty damn stationary. Two exceptions, Res Infinite and Rigs, had me turn around. And I guess to some degree, Under Dawn or Until Dawn, the Carnival game. But in all three of those, it was just pivoting, either my head or my body. So I stayed stationary. So that probably went a long way to, having me maintain tracking with no issues. If I was to have stepped left or right, possibly I could have lost tracking. I didn't purposely do that, but I didn't purposely try to avoid it either. I just played. I just wanted to play the games and how that felt. And that's what I'm saying. By just playing them as they want you to play them, tracking has not been an issue for me with any of those titles that I played. What I did notice is that this unit, more than the other two, constantly asks you to recalibrate. And there's a little square, and you got to line up your face with that. Maybe there's a way to disable that. I don't know. But it seemed like anytime I backed out of a menu, left one game, started another, I was asked to recalibrate. It didn't annoy me. I just noticed that it was frequent. Whereas with the Rift and the Vive, You know, there's the odd time, like say in Elite Dangerous, I'll do the on the fly, push the button to recalibrate, but few and far in between. With this, it was pretty common. Maybe that assisted with the tracking as well, I'm not sure. The camera is a frickin' nuisance, okay? The stand that it's on, hey, all the best noble intentions I'm sure went into the design of that stand, but it is very crappy for being able to keep that damn thing still. Again, it didn't ruin any tracking for me, but it's finicky in terms of just setting it up initially because there's so much weight on that cable and it's so light, it seems to just dominate that camera, that massive cable jutting out the back, and it's not quite long enough. I would have loved to have that cable be a bit longer. Speaking of cables, let's go back to the Sony PlayStation VR one more time. This cable of the three, the least noticeable. At no time did I feel while I was playing it, and granted, I'm way used to a cable now jutting out of my head, right? But it was of the three, this was the least noticeable. And look at it, it's such a small cable. Even with this, you don't notice it, barely at all, right? I would say easily Vive is the most noticeable. It's hard to forget, especially with the older cable, the 3 bulky one, right? Then the Rift, then this in terms of how you notice it. What else did we get into? So we talked about the games. I played a decent variety of games. The demo discs, fantastic. That's how you do it. The only issue I had with any of the demos was the Eve of Valkyrie, which uses the time-honored time limit one, which just pisses the ever-living snot out of me. Like, that just bugs my liver. What I don't like about that is you just start getting into a game, you're getting to the point where you're starting your evaluation. If you want to play the full game, please pay. It stops. It bugs me, right? Then look at a game like Riggs. I didn't even think I was playing a demo game. It just felt that complete and full, and I'm, as a result, way more likely to buy, and I will buy it. But I was kept busy for hours. That's how you do a demo, right? But hey, they're all making their living, and they have methods of madness, but the time limit one, the end result, you're not really able to test the game. So Eve of Valkyrie, disappointing in that sense, but there was more than enough to keep me busy game-wise. Lots of variety on those demo discs. Let's talk about the negatives now of the game. So I said earlier that, look, launch to launch, Sony has more mainstream titles and more titles that push closer to the high end of what the system is capable than the Rift or the Vive did. There's a disadvantage to that, namely, with the Rift and the Vive, you always felt that there were affordable choices, right? On any given night, you could say, you know what, I do want to buy a new game, but I don't want to spend more than, say, $15, right? There's your $5 options, your $10, $12, $15, $20 options, a dime a dozen for all of those, probably because there's so many more indie titles, and we already said that, right? But it gave you a lot of consumer choice. With Sony, I guess the negative of there being so many mainstream titles is reflected in the price. There are almost no $5, $10, $15 choices available. One of your cheaper games, the Until Dawn one, that Carnival one I ended up enjoying so much on the demo and bought, was $24. And hey, totally worth it in my opinion. I had a lot of fun with that game. Batman, $29, which I'll probably still do. A lot of you are saying it's fun for 1 hour. But nothing that's $15 or $20 or $10, right? So keep that in mind as well. Your game cost, over the long haul, is probably going to bring that price differential almost to the same territory as a Rift or a Vive unit after about a year or two, just by buying those titles. I can look at my library for the Rift and the Vive both, and for the Vive, even though they're mostly early access games, just cost-wise, they're not $49, $59 each game. That would have been thousands of dollars in games. So that'll be something to consider too, that in the long run, you're going to probably pay more until you know, there's more indie stuff available. And that was the other puzzle. And maybe you guys have some answers to that. Why there haven't been more indie offerings for PlayStation VR. You know, given the amount of lead time that they had to develop stuff and the relationship that Sony has had with indie publishers has been fairly okay, was my guess. But I could be wrong on that. That did stand out as well and reflected in all those things we talked about, price, graphics, etc., etc. Just trying to think if there's anything else controller-wise. I use the Gamepad and I use the wand controllers. Not a fan of those controllers, by the way. Hopefully the next iteration, whenever that is, just like Vive, they changed the damn controller. I almost had more enjoyment with the Gamepad, and it's pretty shocking to hear myself say that, but yeah, not a fan of those controllers at all. And they look freaking cool. The Sony is a device that if you got buddies, you're in the same room, you're watching somebody play, they are definitely, of the three, this is completely useless, trivial stat, but they are the best to look at. They look awesome, right? They look futuristically cool. We talked about the cable. We talked about, yeah, pretty much anything, everything. If you've got any questions, let me know in the comments below. I'm going to get to some fun stuff now, and which involves a lot more game playing. As always, guys, cheers. And yeah, just leave me comments below. I will do my best to answer them. Expect other videos where I do stuff like the tracking testing in much more kind of in-depth manner. As always, guys, cheers, and definitely catch you on the VR flip side.